Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. Patch 11.05 is releasing in just a handful of days and is definitely going to shake up the Season 1 meta of the War Within. While the update is primarily focused on adding new activities for you to participate in during the 20th anniversary, it also brings with it a decent bit of class changes, quite a few in fact, whether it is them trying to correct some of the fantasy aspects of a hero spec, but also add some brand new channels to freshen up a handful of playstyles, especially some of the struggling playstyles out there. And with them finally officializing all of the new class changes arriving with 11.05, many have begun to wonder, how is the meta going to be shaken up, and what are the chances that your current main could potentially fall off the Season 1 ladder? As I spent quite a bit of time over on the PTR checking out all of these new changes, and I was able to identify a handful of classes which I think could be sprung at the front of the pack for the current season in the War Within, in case you're looking for some old star level during 20th anniversary. As always, if you guys want to see more regular updates for War Within expansion, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's dive right in. Among the variety of different class changes arriving with 11.05, one of the biggest and the most exciting ones is the one coming to Dark Ranger Hunters. Not Marksman or Beast Mastery specifically, but mostly to the hero spec of the Dark Ranger, which gets a ton of new and fantastic fantasy-based changes, but also a ton of gameplay adjustments and quality of life improvements. The entire spec has been redesigned. Instead of giving you Black Arrow as a separate ability, it instead replaces your kill shot with a different version that still deals a lot of upfront damage but also has a trickling dot. And the ability of Black Arrow, which is your new kill shot, can then be modified through a variety of class talents, spec talents, as well as the Dark Ranger talents to be further augmented. Since the Dark Ranger playstyle is going to be a lot more revolved, it'll affect different hunter specs in a variety of different ways. For example, since Beast Mastery has an interaction with Hunter's Prey, where kill shot will strike an additional target for each active pet that you have out. So abilities such as Call of the Wild in a large AoE situation where you summon a ton of different pets could be potentially insane when it comes to their overall AoE damage. And then you got other quality updates like Banshee's Mark, which gives you this flavorful, shadowy murder of crows which fits with a Dark Ranger aesthetic. Plus quite a bit of additional AoE damage with Shadow Surge as well as Bleak Powder. And then there's the Withering Fire ability, which after using 3 Bishop Brass or whenever you use True Shot as a marksman, grants you a buff that allows you to enhance your Black Arrow that starts to fire automatically whenever you were to gain the Death Blow effect, which allows you to rapid fire barrage your enemies with so many Black Arrows. On top of it, just even getting that buff looks absolutely amazing. Look at these Banshee wings that actually move with your character. It's a very small addition visually, but I think personally it looks amazing, and with the right set, the swings could definitely be accentuated. There's also a question regarding some of the different spec-specific interactions with Dark Ranger, which are a little bit up in the air right now, whether it is an unintended interaction or if it's meant to work that way. But also when it comes to bug fixing and ability tuning, if this is meant to do as much damage as it does, Dark Ranger Hunters in particular could actually be put quite a bit ahead of the pack when it comes to the endgame viability. Not only is Dark Ranger Hunter getting amped up, but so is Survival, especially as a pack leader, as they're trying to simplify the playstyle of Survival just a tad. The upgrade talent from Butchery of Merciless Blows no longer complicates the rotation between juggling of charges of Butchery, as well as Raptor Strikes Among Us Bites, while also keeping all those other buttons on cooldown. Instead, it just amps up the ability of Butchery by quite a bit, thus overall improving Survival Hunters at the very bare minimum AoE damage, but also decent bits to their single target. Plus, Pack Leader, while not a super flavorful hero spec, it is just about as passive as Sentinel, so it's really just like a choice between one passive or another, which aren't all that interesting. At the very least though, Pack Leader has seen some significant buffs like Wild Attacks buffing your single target damage, while Howl of the Pack buffing your AoE by quite a bit. And with the natural synergy that Pack Leader has with the ability of Butchery, this could potentially be the go-to playstyle that now has a bit more interaction with a Hunter spec, but also giving you actual options between the hero specs that you get to play with an endgame content. So with all being said, all 3 specs of Survival in fact are seeing some sort of a leg up going forward in 11.05, which could potentially put the class in a much better standing for Season 1 content. And we've been able to cover a lot of those class changes quite rigorously on this channel, going over in detail about all of the different updates and improvements that all of them are receiving. But out of all those 3 specs, Arcane in particular is continuing to see even more improvements, which is arguably probably one of the most popular ranged DPS classes out here by far. First things first, one of the biggest changes mages are seeing is a replacement to Nether Precision and the way that it functions with Barrage, where previously it was a bug, well, I guess an intended bug in a way, that added some rotational complexity to the arcane, but it allowed abilities like your Arcane Blast and Barrage, if they were cast at the same time, with Barrage being instant, to double dip into Nether Precision, with both spells benefiting from its damage amp. However, as of this patch, they're actually removing that interaction, but are adding a new talent called Aether Vision, where consuming Nether Precision with your Arcane Blast will increase the damage of your next Barrage, causing Barrage to also restore additional resources, which retains a lot of that familiarity of gameplay while also restoring all of those arcane charges, so you can continue to pummel the target with Arcane Blast again and again, while also still being able to play into a very familiar bit of gameplay. However, some players have discovered that Archimage's Barrage is probably going to be hyper juiced within 11.05, because there's a lot of gameplay implications as to how much that a single ability could potentially do. So we have Nether Precision that can buff the damage of your barrages, but also with the right setup, Aether Vision can also further buff the damage of your barrage. So there's quite a few abilities that already increase the potency of one ability. They also added new talents to try to promote late Drinker Temple playstyle, specifically a talent above it with Layside, which can further increase the effectiveness of Nether Precision bonus to 30% instead of 20, so even more damage for the barrage. With Sun Fury, they have adjusted it a little bit, where Burden of Power only procs off of Arcane Blast, but Glorious Incandescence still is tied to Barrage, increasing its damage potentially by 30%. This combined together with the Mage's current tier set, the 2-piece adds you a 6% damage buff, while the 4-piece adds you a 20% damage buff for all your Barrage abilities. The talent of Arcane Harmony can slowly build up the damage of your next barrage up to 100% additional damage, while Arcane Delimitation, depending on your proximilsas, can further debuff the enemy so they take up to 18% potentially from your next barrage. With the talent of Arcane Bombardment, Barrage gains 100% more damage when it strikes a target in an execute window, but if you were to pick up Sun Fury with Sun Fury's execution, the damage window is being increased to 130% amp. And with the Magi Spark, while Touch of Magi is on the target, your Arcane Barrage, Arcane Blast, and Missiles all echo for 100% of their total damage. So that barrage can actually echo for another bit of burst altogether. So you look at it overall, 40 times X modifiers for your Arcane Barrage's damage, which is kind of jaw-dropping, to be honest. And I feel that what our Arcane Mage is right now, well, they're actually quite potent, they're actually quite strong. I feel like they're only about to get even stronger. So it's kind of a situation of the rich keep getting richer, and I think Arcane Mage might be a pretty safe meta pick going forward. Now, another class that's probably going to be a pretty safe meta pick going forward will be the Shaman, and not just because they're getting some brand new visual animations, which looks absolutely fantastic, but the entire class is getting a much needed overhaul. Even though Shamans are in a very good spot damage-wise, rotationally, they're not amazing, with Elemental basically being a lightning bot right now, but they're trying to turn this around for Elemental and Enhancement and Human Restoration, where the entire package of Shaman is looking extremely good. One of the biggest things they wanted to do for Elemental is to find a way to fuse those elements together. So lightning and lava and frost, all of those things are going to play together a little bit more comprehensively, because there's now a little bit more player agency in how you achieve some of those various procs for all of your base abilities. Though the biggest change is going to be the positional changes but adjustments to Ascendance, which is actually now going to not only empower just your fire abilities but all abilities through your mastery, causing those mastery overloads to be even more effective, but benefiting both lightning and fire abilities, so Ascendance is no longer a fire-specific build type of gameplay to it. And Handsome Shaman is in a very similar boat, specifically when it comes to some of their talents, like abilities like Doom Winds becoming something that can cleave, but also deal decent single target damage, a little bit more comprehensive that way. Even abilities such as Ice Strike can also be swapped out for a more passive version that functions relatively similarly, but you have one less keybind to manage. When it comes to hero specs for enhancement, this is where we saw the biggest changes with Stormbringer, buff for both enhancement and elemental, but a lot of the more powerful talents for Stormbringer got to stay and no longer compete with some of the less powerful options. And then there's Totemic, which potentially could be a very solid option on the table. It is still a little bit clunky to utilize Surgeon Totem, but the capstone for the Surgeon Totem are a lot better. It allows you to harness and control whenever you get your hot hands procs, so it gives you a proper burst window. Using lightning bolts and chain lightnings allows you to overload the totem, which is better than tied into Storm Strikes, because all builds will end up spinning that Maelstrom. Then there's new talents that we have some questions regarding if this is an intended mechanic or not, such as being able to summon Ghost Tools, Passively, with the Flowing Spirit's talent, which whenever you deal damage, you have a chance to summon a Feral Spirit. With the tier set, you can summon an additional Feral Spirit whenever you summon a Feral Spirit, which procs off of your passive, and you can also imbue those spirits with either elemental damage or physical damage bonuses. However, with you being a shaman, there is a little bit of this tinge of RNG tied to the spec. So sometimes you'll summon only a few of these Feral Spirits, and other times you'll summon an absolute army of them like you're a Beast Mastery Hunter. Now, if Shaman comes out as is, Enhancement may end up being one of the best melee classes in the game, though we're not exactly sure which parts of these interactions are a bug or unintended mechanic, because a few of them do feel like an unintended mechanic, which could potentially set up Enhancement for some heavy nerfs, but if this is intentional, Enhance might actually be the best melee in the game from there on out. And while this update does focus in on Elemental and Enhancement for the most part, it doesn't mean that Restoration is out of the loop either. Primarily, it gets two new talents, one of them being Coalescing Water, where Chain Heal's mana cost is reduced by 10%, and Chain Heal increases the initial healing of an next Riptide by 75%, stacking up to 2 times. This doesn't necessarily mean that as a shaman you'll now have to start spamming ability of Chain Heal in order to get a lot of that effect working, like especially if you play Totemic, because a lot of your totems will actually Chain Heal for free. So just dropping a totem actually increases the effectiveness of your next Riptide on a target. And this could benefit some of the other Riptide based talents within your talent tree, so it has a little bit more synergy, but allows you to throw out a Chain Heal, then pop a big Riptide, and wait until other Chain Heal buffs are available, where then you can get another Chain Heal going, and then get another big Riptide on a target. So you'll be kind of swapping between one and the other back and forth, but it actually gives you quite a solid bit of burst window heal with your Riptide. Another buff is going to be to Reactive Warding, which essentially allows Earth Shield and Water Shield to consume their stacks every 2 seconds instead of every 3 seconds, effectively a buff for Earth Shield healing, but it does mean you'll probably need to recast the ability of Earth Shield a little bit more often. Now, another class has been lurking in the shadows, but may actually get some time in the spotlight, is actually the Rogue, a class that we were actually very surprised to see very little changes throughout the alpha and beta development over the War Within, but it looks like this might be the time for Rogues to finally shine, as they're finally getting a couple of much needed talent adjustments. First of all, there's a number of convenience changes, such as the fact that rogues will not have to maintain Slice and Dice or even have a button on their bars to maintain it, since it'll be automatically reapplied and refreshed whenever you use some of your basic combo point spenders, which is a huge quality of life update that helps free up your action bars a little. Another change we're seeing with the spec is the removal of Echo and Reprimand, which becomes more of a passive effect that happens all on its own, but instead it's been replaced with a mechanic of Supercharger. When you use basic rogue abilities like Shiv as Assassination to set up your next big Envenom, or Symbols of Death to empower your abilities as Subtlety, or whenever you roll the bones for buffs as Outlaw, your next 2 finishers are empowered. So if let's say you were to spend 7 calm points max into your next finisher, so it deals maximum damage, it instead acts as if this finisher consumed 9 calm points instead of 7, so you just add a +2 per finisher. For specific Assassination in particular, this means that you can buff the damage of your Envenoms inside of your Deathmark window by quite a bit. And there's even some playstyles like Deathstalker with Lingering Darkness that can buff the damage of Envenom after your Deathmark expires, or maybe even Symbolic Victory to further buff the damage of an Envenom to scale better with Supercharger for some massive single target burst damage. But it can also be applied for your AoE bleed abilities, which is only going to make Assassination a better spec within AoE content. Spec like Subtlety in particular gains very unique gameplay with the Supercharger ability, which amps up all of your finishers, and Subtlety is literally the master of finisher damage. And the spec is even getting a bit more interaction in the department with Depth Perception, where Symbols of Death, the ability that can activate Supercharger, now has 3 charges, so now you can weave those buffs in between one another during burst windows to make sure that you have the strongest finisher damage available. But even the spec of Outlaw may actually end up utilizing the Supercharger ability by quite a bit, since it amps up all of their finisher damage, and Outlaw rogues do have quite a bit of burst with their Between the Eyes ability, which deals additional damage when it's a critical strike. So for Outlaw rogue in particular, together with the changes to Crackshot, where Vanish actually resets the cooldown of Between the Eyes, allowing you to use it more regularly, you might actually start pairing together Roll the Bones, Vanish to reset your cooldown of Between the Eyes, and fire off as many powerful pistol shots as possible. which gives this spec a much needed burst window that many players have been craving for, and that's something this playstyle has severely been lacking in. Though out of all the different class specs in Season 1, Frost Death Knight is definitely at the top of the charts, single-handedly becoming the most popular melee DPS spec amongst everybody within raiding or even Mythic Plus content. But it's only getting better going forward, especially when it comes to the Deathbringer playstyle, which is where the bulk of Death Knight changes comes from. For the most part, you're seeing a familiarity of a lot of the same challenges you've seen before, but then things like Wither Away become its own talent, no longer a choice node, which is quite an upgrade in overall Deathbringer damage. Also, Deathbringer can now interact a little bit differently with Grim Reaper, where the initial mark will now grant you Killing Machine, but also the explosion can deal more damage based on your target's missing health, or the ability can instead interact better with your Soul Reaper ability, which can be further improved, giving you a much bigger execute window. The initial talent that allows you to use 2 exterminates rather than 1 has now been baked directly into your capstone, which further amplifies it. And the talent that initially allowed you to enhance your exterminate is now called Swift and Painful, which further buffs the single target potential of Wave of Souls, while causing Soul Rapture to grant you a strength buff when you only strike a single target with it, so giving this class even more single target value. So Deathbringer all on its own is still going to continue to carry both Blood and Frost Death Knights. For Frost, we did see a slight nerf with Arctic Assault, where instead of getting a Glacial Advance for 100% effectiveness on your Killing Machine procs, it is now down to 80% effectiveness, but this kind of a nerf is nowhere near enough to compete with the raw sheer power that is brought on by the Deathbringer, at least based on some of the early numbers, which should on paper allow the class of Death Knight for Frost and Blood in particular, which I think probably makes him one of the safer picks going forward. But with everything being said, I do want to thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I hope all of you enjoyed. If you did enjoy this update or found it informative, go ahead and give this video a like. I would very much appreciate it. Join our Discord community if you want to stay up to date with all the regular War Within updates and discuss them with the rest of the community. Also, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.